The year was 2347, and humanity had spread across the stars. They had built colonies on distant worlds and made friends with alien civilizations. Earth was peaceful. Earth was prosperous. Earth believed that war was a thing of the past. Admiral Daniel Cooper stood on the bridge of his ship, the TCS Resolute. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had served in the Terran Coalition Navy for 30 years, but he had never fired a weapon in anger. There had been no need. The galaxy seemed like a peaceful place. That peaceful illusion shattered on a cold Tuesday morning when the sensors detected something massive entering the solar system. Daniel watched the holographic display with growing concern. The energy signatures were unlike anything in the database. Whatever was coming, it was big, very big. The Dominion had arrived. Their fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of metal locusts. 8,000 warships of various sizes filled the void between Mars and Jupiter. The smallest of their vessels was larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their flagship was a mountain of black metal that stretched for miles in every direction. Daniel felt his stomach drop as the numbers kept climbing on his display. 8,000 ships. Earth's entire defensive fleet numbered less than 300 vessels. Most of those were scattered across distant colonies. Only 47 ships currently orbited Earth. The alien transmission came through on all frequencies. A reptilian face appeared on every screen across the solar system. Supreme Commander of the Dominion spoke in a cold and emotionless voice that the universal translator rendered into perfect English. Humanity had 72 hours to surrender unconditionally. They would accept rule. They would provide workers for Dominion mining operations. They would hand over all military assets. Failure to comply would result in the complete destruction of Earth and every human colony. The transmission ended. Silence filled the bridge of the Resolute. On Earth, Chancellor Maria called an emergency session of the United Earth Council. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes. She had spent her entire career building diplomatic relationships with alien species. She had believed that reason and negotiation could solve any conflict. Now she faced a species that had no interest in negotiation. Intelligence reports on the Dominion painted a terrifying picture. They had conquered 43 civilizations over the past 10,000 years. They did not negotiate. They did not show mercy. Species that surrendered were enslaved. Species that resisted were exterminated. There was no middle ground. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Some members demanded immediate surrender to save human lives. Others called for a desperate last stand. A few simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process the reality of extinction. Maria raised her hand for silence. The room gradually quieted. She asked a simple question. What resources did humanity actually have? Secretary of Defense Price stepped forward. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke in council meetings. He carried a data pad that contained information classified at the highest levels. Began to speak, and the council members listened with growing disbelief. Across the solar system, Lieutenant Commander sat at her post in Lunar Station Alpha. She was young for her rank, barely 30 years old, with short brown hair and quick eyes. Her job was signals intelligence. She listened to enemy communications and tried to understand their intentions. What she heard made her blood boil. They were not worried about humanity. They were not preparing for battle. They were dividing the spoils. Noble houses argued over which continents they would claim. Officers debated which human cities would make the best slave markets. Scientists discussed the most efficient ways to strip mine the planet. They spoke about humanity the way a farmer speaks about cattle, resources to be harvested, nothing more. Recorded everything and sent it to Admiral Cooper aboard the Resolute. She included her own analysis in the report. They had studied humanity for decades. They had watched the news broadcasts showing political divisions. They had observed the small size of the Terran fleet. They had concluded that humans were a weak and fractured species that would collapse at the first sign of pressure. They did not think Earth would fight. Daniel read the report in his private quarters. His hands trembled slightly as he set down the data pad. He thought about his daughter on Earth. He thought about his who had never known war. He thought about the billions of people who were depending on him to do something. The admiral walked back to the bridge. His officers looked at him with fear in their eyes. They knew the odds. 47 ships against 8,000. It was not a battle. It was suicide. Daniel activated the fleet-wide communication channel. His voice was calm and steady despite the terror in his heart. He told them the truth. The enemy thought humanity would surrender. The enemy thought humanity was weak. The enemy thought humanity would not fight. The enemy was wrong. Back on Earth, Chancellor Maria addressed the people of the Terran coalition. Her speech was broadcast to every colony, every station, and every ship in human space. She did not promise victory. She did not make empty boasts. She simply stated a fact. Humanity would not kneel. They had faced extinction before. Ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions. Every time they had survived. Every time they had grown stronger. This would be no different. The 72-hour deadline ticked away. The waited for surrender that would never come. Their scouts monitored human space and reported no military buildup, no evacuation efforts, no signs of panic. Supreme Commander found this puzzling. Every other species had begged for mercy by now. Every other species had offered tribute and slaves in exchange for survival. These humans simply went about their daily lives as if nothing was wrong. Perhaps they were too stupid to understand the danger. Perhaps they were paralyzed by fear. Either way, it did not matter. When the deadline passed, the Dominion would begin its assault. Earth would burn. The human species would learn obedience through pain. In the shadows of Saturn's rings, hidden from all sensors, something stirred. Ancient engines began to warm. Weapons systems that had never been tested powered up for the first time. Crews that had trained in secret for generations took their positions. They saw what they expected to see, a primitive species with no significant military power. They did not see what humanity had hidden. They did not know what was coming. Commander Torres was stationed near the colonies when the signal reached his ship. He was playing cards with his crew in the mess hall when his communication officer burst through the door with wide eyes and a trembling voice. The Prometheus protocol had been activated. Dropped his cards and ran to the bridge. His ship, the TCS Nightfall, was officially classified as a deep space research vessel. It carried scientific equipment and a small crew of 40 people. That was what the records showed. That was what the galaxy believed. The truth was very different. Entered a code into his command console. The walls of the ship began to shift. Hidden panels slid open to reveal weapon systems that had never been fired. The hull reconfigured itself as armor plating locked into place. The research vessel transformed into a warship in less than 3 minutes. His crew moved to their battle stations without a word. They had trained for this moment their entire careers. Every person aboard the Nightfall had been recruited from the regular Navy and sworn to absolute secrecy. They knew their mission. They knew what was at stake. Across human space, the same scene repeated itself on hundreds of ships. Mining vessels became destroyers. Transport freighters became carriers. Colony ships revealed hidden hangars filled with fighters and bombers. The peaceful merchant fleet of the Terran coalition was shedding its disguise. On Earth, Secretary of Defense Price stood before the United Council and revealed the greatest secret in human history. For over 100 years, humanity had been preparing for this day. They had learned from their own past. They had studied the galaxy and seen how peaceful species were conquered by aggressive ones. They had decided that peace through weakness was no peace at all. The Prometheus Protocol was born in the aftermath of First Contact, when humanity learned that the universe contained species capable of interstellar warfare. They made a choice. They would present a peaceful face to the galaxy. They would trade and negotiate and build alliances. But behind that peaceful mask, they would build the largest hidden military force in galactic history. The council members sat in stunned silence as laid out the numbers. 12,000 warships hidden across the solar system and the outer colonies. 50,000 fighters and bombers stored in secret hangars. Millions of soldiers trained in classified facilities on distant moons. Weapons systems that push the boundaries of known physics. One council member asked a simple question: how had they kept this secret for so long? Smiled for the first time. That was the elegant part. Every hidden facility served a legitimate purpose. The shipyards beneath Titan were officially ice mining operations. The weapons laboratories on Europa were catalogued as research stations. The military academies on Mars were registered as technical schools. They had studied humanity for decades. They had seen exactly what humanity wanted them to see. Captain Lisa Monroe commanded the main hidden fleet at Titan Base. She was a small woman with red hair and fierce green eyes. Her family had served in the secret navy for 3 generations. Her grandmother had helped design the first hidden shipyard. Her mother had commanded the construction of the first dreadnought-class vessel. Now Lisa stood on the bridge of the TCS Defiance and watched her display fill with green icons. 12,000 ships awaited her command. They had waited in silence beneath the frozen surface of Titan for 15 years. Today they would rise. Lisa opened a channel to the entire fleet. Her voice was steady and strong. She told them that the enemy had come to enslave their families. The enemy had come to destroy their world. The enemy thought humanity was weak. Today they would learn the truth. Today the hidden fleet would reveal itself. Today humanity would show the galaxy what it truly was. The ice above Titan Base began to crack. Massive doors that had been disguised as natural formations slid open. The first ships rose from the depths like ancient gods awakening from slumber. Dreadnoughts the size of small cities climbed toward the stars. Carriers launched swarms of fighters before they even cleared the surface. Destroyers and cruisers formed into attack formations as they reached open space. The scouts monitoring the outer solar system detected unusual energy readings near Saturn. They tried to report back to the main fleet, but found their communications jammed by interference they could not identify. Their sensors showed impossible readings. Thousands of contacts appearing from nothing. One scout managed to send a partial message before it was destroyed by a Terran strike fighter. On the enemy flagship, Supreme Commander received the garbled transmission. His tactical officers struggled to make sense of the data. The numbers had to be wrong. No primitive species could hide a fleet that size. Their surveillance had been thorough. Their intelligence was reliable. Demanded clarification. His officers could not provide it. The scout ships near Saturn had gone silent. Energy signatures across the solar system were spiking in patterns that made no sense. For the first time in his long career, felt something unfamiliar. He felt uncertain. Admiral Daniel Cooper received confirmation that the hidden fleet was en route. Relief washed over him, but he kept his face neutral. His crew could not know about Prometheus. Even now, only a handful of people in the regular Navy understood what was happening. The deadline was 6 hours away, the expected surrender or easy conquest. They were about to receive neither. In her office on Luna, Lieutenant Commander intercepted new enemy communications. The tone had changed. Confusion had replaced arrogance. The commanders were demanding answers that their subordinates could not provide. Allowed herself a small smile. They had spent decades thinking of humanity as prey. They had planned their conquest down to the smallest detail. They had never once considered that the prey might have teeth. The hidden fleet moved through space at maximum speed. 12,000 ships racing toward Sol, 12,000 crews who had trained their entire lives for a battle they hoped would never come. They were farmers and teachers and scientists in their official records. In truth, they were warriors. Commander Tor stood on the bridge of his transformed ship and watched the stars streak past. In a few hours, he would engage an enemy that outnumbered the visible Terran fleet by nearly 200 to 1. The odds did not matter. The fear did not matter. Only the mission mattered. Humanity had prepared for this moment for over a century. Generations had lived and died keeping the secret. Parents had trained children who trained their own children. An entire shadow civilization had existed alongside the public one. Now that civilization was mobilizing for war. The Dominion had conquered 43 species. They had perfected the art of intimidation and overwhelming force. They had never encountered a species that lied about its own weakness. They had never faced an enemy that hid its true strength. They were about to learn that humanity played a very different game. The hidden fleet approached Sol, 12,000 ships prepared for battle. The greatest secret in human history was about to be revealed. And the galaxy would never be the same. The deadline passed at midnight Earth time. Supreme Commander gave the order to begin the invasion. His fleet moved toward Earth in a formation that had crushed 43 civilizations before. They expected this conquest to be no different. They were wrong. The first Terran ships appeared on their sensors near Jupiter. 3,000 vessels emerged from behind the gas giant in perfect formation. The tactical officers blinked in confusion. Their intelligence had reported fewer than 300 human ships in the entire solar system. Before they could process this information, 3,000 more ships appeared near Mars. Then another 3,000 from the asteroid belt. Then 2,000 from the direction of Saturn. They found themselves surrounded by a fleet larger than their own. Stared at his display in disbelief. His mouth opened but no words came out. This was impossible. His scouts had surveyed the system for months. His intelligence officers had guaranteed human weakness. Someone had made a terrible mistake. Admiral Daniel Cooper broadcast a message to the enemy fleet. His voice was calm and measured. He offered the one chance to withdraw, leave human space and never return. There would be no negotiation. There would be no tribute. There would only be war or peace. Responded with fury. He ordered his fleet to attack. The Dominion did not retreat. The Dominion did not show fear. These humans had hidden ships, but they were still primitives. Superior technology would crush them. The first salvos screamed across the void. Terran weapons slammed into shields with devastating force. The enemy had expected primitive missiles and basic energy weapons. Instead, they faced technology that matched or exceeded their own. Captain Greg Harrison led a destroyer squadron on the first flanking attack. His ships darted between enemy formations like wolves among cattle. They targeted engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. 3 cruisers died in the first 2 minutes of combat. The Dominion commanders tried to respond, but found human tactics impossible to predict. Their own doctrine relied on rigid formations and overwhelming firepower. The humans fought like chaos itself. Small ships attacked large ones. Damaged vessels continued fighting until they were completely destroyed. Pilots rammed their fighters into enemy bridges rather than retreat. On the surface of Mars, they had already landed invasion forces before the hidden fleet arrived. 50,000 soldiers had taken the colony of New Houston. They expected the humans to surrender once they realized resistance was futile. Major Blake had other plans. She led 300 soldiers through the red canyons that surrounded the city. They carried weapons built in secret factories beneath the Martian surface. They had trained for urban combat their entire adult lives. They knew every tunnel and every building in New Houston. They never saw them coming. Hit the enemy command post at dawn. Her soldiers moved through the alien ranks like ghosts. They struck and vanished before the enemy could respond. By noon, the commander was dead and his forces were in disarray. The aliens regrouped and launched a counterattack. They outnumbered the humans by more than 100 to 1. Their technology was advanced. Their soldiers were experienced. It did not matter. Every street became a killing ground. Every building became a fortress. The humans refused to give up a single block without extracting a terrible price. Soldiers found themselves fighting for hours to advance a few meters. In space, the battle raged with equal fury. Lieutenant Park flew his fighter through the chaos above Earth. His squadron had started with 24 pilots. After 3 hours, only 9 remained. They kept fighting anyway. Spotted an enemy carrier launching a new wave of fighters. He directed his squadron toward it without hesitation. They were outnumbered 4 to 1. The odds meant nothing. They had a job to do. His weapons tore into the carrier's launch bay. Secondary explosions ripped through the vessel as fuel and ammunition ignited. The carrier broke apart in a flowering explosion that lit up the void, pulled away just before the blast wave could catch him. Admiral Cooper watched the battle unfold from his command station. The Terran fleet was taking losses. 700 ships had been destroyed or disabled, but they had lost nearly twice that number. The enemy formations were breaking apart as human tactics sowed confusion and fear. On the enemy flagship faced a terrible realization. He was losing. The Dominion had never lost a battle. They had never faced an enemy who fought with such coordinated ferocity. These humans did not behave like a primitive species. They fought like an ancient civilization that had perfected the art of war. He ordered his fleet to regroup. They would consolidate their forces and strike at Earth directly, destroy the enemy, and the rest would surrender. That was how it always worked. That was how it had to work. The fleet pulled back toward the outer solar system. They formed into a massive wedge formation with the flagship at its center. 3,000 ships pointed toward the blue marble that was Earth. They would punch through the human defenders and burn the planet to ash. Captain Lisa Monroe intercepted them with her dreadnought group. 100 of the largest ships humanity had ever built formed a wall between the enemy and Earth. Their weapons filled space with fire. Their shields absorbed punishment that would have destroyed lesser vessels. The battle became a grinding war of attrition. Ships died on both sides. Escape pods scattered across the void as crews abandoned crippled vessels. The darkness between worlds turned red with the light of countless explosions. But the human line held. 17 hours after the first shot was fired, the advance stalled. They had thrown everything at the human defenders. They had sacrificed 2,000 ships. They had not reached Earth. Sat in his command chair and stared at the tactical display. His fleet was still larger than the human force. They still had superior numbers, but the humans fought with a fury he had never witnessed. Every ship they lost was replaced by 2 more from the hidden reserves. Every pilot they killed was avenged by a dozen. For the first time in Dominion history, a conquered species was fighting back. For the first time, they faced an enemy that would not break. And deep in his cold reptilian heart, Supreme Commander felt something he had never felt before. He felt afraid. Supreme Commander made a decision that would haunt the Dominion for centuries. He sent an emergency call for reinforcements. Every available ship from 3 neighboring sectors was ordered to converge on Sol. The full military power of the Empire would crush this stubborn species once and for all. The message traveled across Dominion space at faster than light speed. Within hours, 6,000 additional warships began their journey toward human territory. It was the largest military mobilization in history. It should have been enough to destroy any enemy. But humanity had anticipated this response. Commander led the Second Fleet through hyperspace toward the supply lines. 4,000 Terran ships emerged behind enemy territory and began systematic destruction. They hit fuel depots that served the reinforcement fleet. They destroyed ammunition convoys that had been gathered from a dozen worlds. They tore apart communication relays that coordinated enemy movements. The reinforcements arrived at Sol to find themselves cut off from home. Their supplies were running low. Their communications were jammed. They had expected to join a victorious fleet. Instead, they joined a desperate struggle against an enemy that refused to die. Captain commanded the TCS Horizon on deep raids into Dominion space. His mission was simple but dangerous. He would attack enemy worlds that had never seen war. He would show the conquered species of the Dominion that their masters could bleed. Brought his ship out of hyperspace above a colony world that had surrendered to the Dominion 3 centuries ago. They had been slaves ever since. Generations had lived and died under rule. A small Dominion garrison protected the planet, destroyed it in 12 minutes. Then he broadcast a message to the surface. He told what was happening at Sol. He told them that humans were fighting the Dominion and winning. He told them that freedom was possible. The Dominion was not invincible. They could be defeated. The message spread across the slave worlds like fire. Species that had forgotten the meaning of hope began to remember. Whispers of rebellion grew into shouts. The Dominion found itself facing unrest on dozens of planets just as it needed every soldier for the war against humanity. Chancellor Maria broadcast her own message to the galaxy. She spoke to every species watching the conflict unfold. She did not ask for help. She did not beg for allies. She simply stated the truth. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would not stop fighting. The Dominion had picked a fight with the wrong species, and when the dust settled, there would be a new power in the galaxy. A power that believed in freedom instead of slavery. A power that offered friendship instead of chains. They were the first to respond. They had hidden in their home system for 3,000 years, terrified of the Dominion. Now they emerged with medical ships and supply vessels. They offered humanitarian aid to the Terran forces. It was not much, but it was something. It was a beginning. Back in Sol, Admiral Daniel Cooper coordinated the largest offensive in human history. The reinforcement fleet had arrived, but they found no easy victory. Terran ships that had been held in reserve now joined the battle. Fresh pilots replaced exhausted ones. New tactics exploited weaknesses that the first engagement had revealed. Medical Officer Reeves worked aboard the hospital ship TCS Mercy. She had not slept in 3 days. Wounded soldiers from both sides filled every bed and corridor. Terran sailors with burns and broken bones lay beside captured with similar injuries. Treated them all without discrimination. Her oath as a healer did not distinguish between friend and enemy. A wounded creature was a wounded creature, regardless of which side they fought for. One officer woke to find a human nurse changing his bandages. He did not understand. The Dominion executed enemy wounded. They did not waste resources on compassion. Yet here he was, receiving care that matched what any human would receive. He asked why they were helping him. His people had come to destroy her world. His people had killed thousands of her kind. Why show mercy to an enemy? Looked at him with tired eyes. She told him that this was what made them different. This was why they fought, not for conquest or glory or revenge. They fought to protect a way of life that valued every living being, even enemies. The officer did not respond. He could not. Everything he had been taught about humanity was wrong. They were not weak or primitive or foolish. They were something he had never encountered before. They were something the Dominion had never faced. In the void above Earth, the battle entered its final phase. They had committed everything they had. 14,000 ships in total had entered the Sol system. Less than 6,000 remained operational. The humans had lost heavily as well. Nearly 3,000 Terran ships floated as wreckage among the stars. But humanity was still fighting. Every time the Dominion destroyed a ship, another took its place. Every time they killed a pilot, two more launched from hidden carriers. The humans had built their fleet for exactly this kind of war, a war of attrition against a larger enemy, a war of survival where defeat meant extinction. Commander Torres led his transformed ship into the thick of the fighting. The TCS Nightfall had been damaged twice already. Half his crew was wounded. His weapons were running low on ammunition. None of it mattered. They would fight until they won or died trying. Spotted an enemy dreadnought breaking through the Terran line. It was heading toward the orbital defense stations above North America. If it reached them, millions of people on the surface would die. He ordered maximum speed on an intercept course. The Nightfall was a third the size of the enemy ship. Its weapons could barely scratch the dreadnought's shields, but knew something the enemy did not. He knew about the experimental warhead in Torpedo Bay 7. The Nightfall closed to point-blank range, fired everything he had. The torpedoes struck the dreadnought's shield generators with pinpoint accuracy. The shields flickered and died. The experimental warhead punched through the weakened armor and detonated inside the enemy reactor. The dreadnought died in a spectacular explosion that was visible from Earth, pulled his damaged ship away from the blast zone with seconds to spare. His crew cheered despite their wounds and exhaustion. The tide was turning, the Dominion was breaking, and humanity was just getting started. The final battle began at dawn on the fourth day of the war. Supreme Commander gathered every remaining ship in his fleet and pointed them at Earth. He had lost the war. He knew this now, but he would not leave empty-handed. If the Dominion could not have Earth, then no one would. 3,000 ships formed into a massive wedge formation. At its heart was the flagship, a vessel the size of a small moon. Its weapons could crack continents. Its shields could withstand anything humanity had thrown at it, would punch through the human defenders and burn there to ash. Let them remember the price of defying the Dominion. Admiral Daniel Cooper saw the enemy formation taking shape on his tactical display. He understood immediately what intended. This was not a battle for victory. This was a battle for vengeance. Daniel opened a channel to every Terran ship in the system. His voice was calm despite the terror that gripped his heart. He told them what the enemy planned. He told them that Earth was behind them. 8 billion people were counting on them to hold the line. Mothers and fathers and children who had never seen war. They were the wall between the enemy and everything humanity held dear. He told them to hold the line. No matter what happened, no matter how many ships they lost, they would not let a single enemy vessel reach Earth. Every remaining Terran ship moved to intercept. Damaged vessels that should have been in repair docks limped into formation. Pilots who had been flying for days without sleep strapped themselves back into their fighters. Engineers squeezed one last burst of power from exhausted reactors. Lieutenant Commander coordinated the defense from her station aboard the Resolute. She tracked enemy movements and relayed targeting data to the fleet. Her voice remained steady even as the enemy formation grew larger on her screen. The two fleets collided above the orbit of Mars. The impact was like nothing the galaxy had ever witnessed. Ships died by the dozen in the first seconds of contact. Fighters swarmed around capital ships like angry bees. The darkness of space turned bright with the light of nuclear fire. Captain Lisa Monroe brought her dreadnought group into the heart of the enemy formation. 100 massive vessels carved a path of destruction through ranks. They targeted the escorts protecting the flagship. They cleared a path for the strike teams that followed. Commander Torres led a squadron of fast attack ships toward the enemy command vessel. His ship was held together with emergency patches and hope. His crew was exhausted beyond measure. None of them hesitated for a second. The flagship's point defense systems filled space with fire. Ships exploded all around. He saw friends die in flashes of light that left nothing behind. He kept flying. He kept fighting. There was no other choice. Major Blake had finished liberating Mars. Now she watched the battle from the surface with the soldiers who had survived the ground campaign. They could not help. They could only watch and pray. The flagship pushed forward despite the losses it was taking, had accepted death. He would die, but he would take humanity's with him. Let his name be remembered as the commander who punished human arrogance. Admiral Cooper made a decision. The Resolute turned toward the enemy flagship and accelerated to maximum speed. 37 other ships followed without being ordered. They understood what their commander intended. They would ram the flagship if necessary. They would sacrifice themselves to stop it. The final engagement lasted less than 20 minutes. The Resolute and her escorts threw themselves at the enemy command vessel with suicidal determination. Their weapons pounded its shields without pause. Their pilots flew into its gun ports to silence its cannons. The flagship's shields failed at 17 minutes. Its engines died at 19. At 20 minutes exactly, Commander Torres fired the last torpedo aboard the Nightfall directly into the enemy bridge. Supreme Commander had one final moment of clarity before he died. He understood at last what humanity truly was. They were not prey. They were not primitives. They were survivors. A species that had clawed its way up from nothing and refused to be pushed back down. His last transmission was a warning to the Dominion. Do not pursue this war. Do not seek revenge. They are not what we believed. The flagship exploded in a blast that was visible from Earth with the naked eye. The remaining ships stopped fighting. Their supreme commander was dead. Their fleet was shattered. They had nothing left. The surrender came 3 hours later. What remained of the expeditionary force powered down their weapons and awaited judgment. Of the 14,000 ships that had entered Sol, fewer than 2,000 survived. Chancellor Maria addressed the surviving enemy commanders via holographic transmission. They expected enslavement at best and genocide at worst. That was how the Dominion treated defeated enemies. That was the only way they knew. Maria offered them something different. She offered accountability and eventual integration. The Dominion would face justice for its crimes. War criminals would stand trial. Conquered species would be freed. But the people themselves would not be exterminated. She told them that humanity had the power to destroy them. They had the justification. They had every reason to repay cruelty with cruelty, but they chose not to. That was the difference between humanity and the Dominion. The galaxy changed in the years that followed. The Dominion collapsed as conquered species rose in rebellion. They declared independence for the first time in 3 centuries. They built their first warships to protect their new freedom. A dozen other species emerged from hiding to join the community of free worlds. The Terran coalition grew not through conquest but through alliance. Species that had feared humanity now sought their friendship. They saw a power that could have become a new dominion and chose a different path. They saw strength tempered by compassion. Admiral Daniel Cooper retired to a small farm in Montana. He had seen enough war for one lifetime. Lieutenant Commander took command of the rebuilt Resolute and led exploration missions to the edges of known space. Commander Torres trained a new generation of officers at the academy. He told them stories of the war and the lessons it taught. On 1,000 worlds, children of 100 species learned the story of Earth. They learned about a small blue planet that refused to kneel. They learned about a species that hid its strength until the moment it was needed. They learned that courage and unity could overcome any enemy. They had thought Earth would not fight back. They had thought humanity was weak. They had thought wrong. And the galaxy would never forget it.